Bryony's hand froze inches from the black iron handle when her new husband said, "Never open that door." The command stopped her more completely than a shout could have. She turned from the narrow door at the end of the royal corridor and found Alpha King Torsten standing 20 feet behind her, still dressed in the black ceremonial armor he had worn when he married her less than an hour ago. Firelight caught along its scratched metal edges. A heavy fur mantle covered his broad shoulders, while his crimson cloak trailed behind him across the stone floor. The sword at his hip made him look less like a bridegroom than a king returning from war. Bryony slowly lowered her hand. "I wasn't going to open it." Torsten's dark eyes remained fixed on the door. Good. That single word held something she had not expected from the most feared Alpha King in the Northern Kingdoms. Not anger. Fear. Bryony had spent the entire wedding ceremony trying to understand why Torsten had chosen her at all. She was an Omega with no title worth mentioning, no fortune, and no powerful family waiting to bargain for her future. Her pale sage-green gown had been sewn from fine wool and linen, elegant only because the village seamstress had known how to make simplicity beautiful. Beside Torsten's royal black armor and crimson cloak, she had looked exactly like what the court believed she was, a woman who did not belong beside a king. She had heard their whispers when Torsten placed the marriage ring on her finger. Why her? What could he possibly want with an Omega? Torsten had answered none of those questions. He had simply taken her hand before the entire court and declared her his wife. Then, after the bells stopped ringing and the witnesses disappeared into the wedding feast, he had brought her personally to the private royal wing. There had been no tender promises. No declaration that fate had chosen them. Only 3 rooms she could call her own, a keyring placed in her palm, and one rule. Never open that door. Bryony looked at it again. Unlike every other entrance in the palace, it carried no royal crest. Deep scratches marked the wood near the frame, old enough that someone had tried to polish them away. "What is behind it?" she asked. Torsten finally looked at her. For a moment, the hard control in his face slipped. Something raw moved beneath it, there and gone before she could name it. Something that has nothing to do with you. The answer hurt more than it should have. She had not expected affection from this marriage, but she had expected honesty. Then why put me in the rooms beside it? His jaw tightened. Because these are the safest rooms in the palace. Except for that door. Silence settled between them. Bryony could have lowered her eyes. Omegas were expected to do that when an Alpha King ended a conversation. Instead, she held his gaze. She had agreed to marry Torsten because the marriage gave her something she had never possessed before, a future she could choose how to live. She would not begin it by pretending questions did not exist simply because a powerful man disliked them. "I will respect your rule," she said quietly. "But I won't promise never to ask why it exists." Surprise flickered across Torsten's face. Then something almost like respect replaced it. He stepped closer, stopping several feet away rather than crowding her. "That is fair." The answer startled her. So did what followed. Torsten removed one small silver key from her ring and held it between them. Unlike the others, its bow was carved in the shape of a wolf curled around a crescent moon. "This opens every private passage in this wing except that room. If there is ever danger, use it. You do not need my permission to leave." Bryony stared at the key. She had expected rules from a king. She had not expected an escape route. She accepted it, and his gloved fingers withdrew immediately. Why would I need to escape from the safest rooms in the palace? Torsten's attention shifted once more toward the forbidden door. This time Bryony saw it clearly, not fear for himself, but fear of what might reach her. "Because safety," he said, "is the reason I married you." Before she could ask what he meant, a faint sound came from behind the locked door. 3 soft knocks. Bryony stopped breathing. Torsten went utterly still. Then came a 4th knock, followed by a woman's voice so faint Bryony almost convinced herself she had imagined it. Bryony. Her blood turned cold. She had never been inside this palace before today. No one behind that door should have known her name. The voice behind the door said her name again, and this time Bryony knew Torsten had heard it too. His expression changed so subtly another person might have missed it, but she was watching him now. The Alpha King, who had stood before an entire court without hesitation, looked suddenly caught between two impossible choices. "Who is in there?" Bryony asked. Torsten moved toward the door, placing himself between her and the black iron handle. "No one who should know your name." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give you tonight." The words should have sounded commanding. Instead, they carried exhaustion. Bryony tightened her fingers around the silver key he had given her. She could feel the wolfen moon carving pressing into her palm. "You married me this morning. You brought me here. Whatever is behind that door knew who I was before I ever touched it. You cannot tell me this has nothing to do with me." Torsten looked at her for a long moment. Then the knocking stopped. The silence that followed felt worse. "Come with me," he said. Bryony did not move. "Where?" "Somewhere you can ask questions I am able to answer." That distinction unsettled her, but it was also the first concession he had made. She followed him through a side passage into a small royal library overlooking an enclosed courtyard. There were no servants waiting. No guards inside. Torsten closed the door but did not lock it. Bryony noticed. Perhaps he meant her to. "Why did you choose me?" she asked immediately. Torsten removed his heavy fur mantle and laid it across the back of a chair. Without it, he somehow seemed less like the figure carved onto royal coins and more like a man carrying something alone. 3 months ago, I received a sealed record from the western provinces. Your name was in it." Bryony's heartbeat quickened. "What record?" "I cannot tell you yet." Anger finally pierced her fear. "Then you are not answering me." "I am answering what I can without placing you in greater danger." "You keep saying I am in danger, but you will not tell me from whom." Torsten's gaze hardened, though not at her. "Because I do not know." That answer silenced her. She had expected secrecy. She had not expected uncertainty. "You are the Alpha King. A crown does not make a man all-knowing." He reached into the inner layer of his armor and removed a folded piece of parchment. This arrived 6 days after the record. He placed it on the table. Bryony approached cautiously. Only one sentence had been written across the page. "The Omega must never reach the Eastern Chamber." Her stomach tightened. The Eastern Chamber. Torsten nodded toward the corridor they had left. "The room behind that door." Bryony looked from the message to him. "Someone warned you to keep me away from it, so you married me and put me beside it?" "No," his answer came instantly. "I married you because 2 days after this arrived, someone attempted to remove your name from every surviving census in your province." Bryony stared at him. "Why would anyone care about the name of an ordinary Omega?" "That," Torsten said quietly, "is what I intend to discover." For the first time since the ceremony, the strange marriage shifted shape in her mind. She had believed herself selected for reasons only a king understood. Perhaps Torsten had not brought her into his palace because he possessed the answers. Perhaps he had brought her because he was searching for them too. "Did you know the voice would be there?" she asked. His silence answered before his words did. "I knew something was sealed inside that chamber. I did not know it could speak." Bryony glanced toward the library door. "Then we should investigate it." Torsten's eyes sharpened. "No, you said you wanted the truth. I want you alive long enough to learn it. And I want some say in what happens to my own life." The words hung between them. Torsten could have invoked his authority. Instead, after a long silence, he inclined his head. "You are right." The acknowledgement was small, but something fundamental changed with it. Bryony was no longer merely the Omega he had hidden inside the safest rooms of his palace. She had forced the king to recognize that protection without choice could become another kind of prison. "Tomorrow," Torsten said, "we investigate the records together. The door remains closed until we understand what connects you to it." Bryony considered him, then nodded. "Together." When she returned to her chambers later, 2 guards stood outside the forbidden room. Neither looked at the door. Bryony continued toward her bedchamber, but something pale near the threshold caught her attention. A tiny piece of dried sage lay on the stone floor. She bent and picked it up. Her breath caught. Her mother had once tied the same herb above Bryony's childhood bed, telling her it belonged to an old family blessing whose meaning had been forgotten. Bryony turned toward the forbidden door. Beneath its frame, where there had been nothing before, a thin line of golden light appeared. Then the silver key in her hand grew warm. The silver key warmed until Bryony could feel its heat through her closed fist, yet the forbidden door remained untouched. She stared at the thin golden line beneath it, fighting the instinct to step closer. The two guards noticed nothing. One finally glanced toward her. "Your Majesty?" The title still sounded strange when directed at her. "Has anyone entered this corridor since I left?" "No, Your Majesty." Bryony looked at the dried sage in her other hand. "Send for King Torsten." Minutes later, heavy footsteps approached, and Torsten appeared without his ceremonial cloak, dressed in a dark tunic beneath lighter armor. His gaze went first to Bryony, then to her clenched hand. "What happened?" She opened her palm. The key rested beside the brittle sage leaves. "This was outside my room. My mother used to hang the same herb above my bed." Torsten did not touch it. "Did she ever tell you why?" "She called it a family blessing. Nothing more." Bryony turned toward the forbidden door. The golden light had disappeared, and the key became warm when I picked it up. Torsten dismissed the guards, then inspected the threshold without approaching the handle. Bryony watched his face. "You recognize the sage?" "I recognize the custom." "From where?" He hesitated. "Old royal records." That was enough. "Then we begin now." Torsten glanced at the dark windows. "It is nearly midnight. Something behind your door knows my name. Someone erased me from official records, and an old royal custom somehow belonged to my mother. I am not going to sleep simply because the hour is inconvenient." For the briefest moment, something softened in his expression. "Very well." The archive occupied 2 floors beneath the western tower. Torsten unlocked it himself. Inside, shelves rose nearly 15 feet beneath a vaulted ceiling, crowded with centuries of census rolls, marriage records, royal decrees, and family registries. Bryony expected him to summon scholars. Instead, he carried boxes while she searched the catalog. It was the first ordinary thing she had seen him do, and somehow it made trusting him more dangerous. Near 2 in the morning, Bryony found her province. Her childhood census listed the baker, the blacksmith, 6 farming families, even a traveler who had remained there for only 1 winter. Her own household was missing. "Torsten." He crossed the room immediately. Bryony showed him the page. "Someone did not remove only my name. They removed my mother too." Torsten examined the binding. This page was replaced. "How can you tell?" He pointed to the stitching. "Different thread." Bryony searched the adjacent volumes until another inconsistency appeared. A tax ledger from 22 years earlier contained the name of the cottage where Bryony had grown up, but under its occupants someone had drawn a careful black line. Beneath it, one word remained partially visible. "Warden." Bryony's pulse quickened. "My mother was called a healer." Torsten looked troubled. A warden was not a healer. Then what was she? He went to a locked cabinet and returned with a thin volume bearing an old wolf and crescent emblem. Bryony stopped breathing. It matched the carving on her silver key. Torsten opened the book, but several pages had been deliberately removed. One surviving sentence remained near the torn edge. "Only a warden may answer when the Eastern Chamber calls." Bryony read it twice. "Answer," she whispered. "Not open. Answer." A memory surfaced with painful clarity. She was perhaps 6 years old, lying beneath bundles of sage while her mother sat beside her in candlelight. If you ever hear someone calling where no one should be, little bird, do not follow the voice. Ask what it remembers. Bryony had thought it was a bedtime warning. Now she understood that her mother had been preparing her for something. "We need to go back." Torsten closed the book. "Bryony, I am not opening the door." She met his gaze. "But your rule said nothing about speaking to it." He almost objected. Then he stopped, recognizing that the choice belonged to her. They returned to the eastern corridor together. Torsten remained several feet behind as Bryony approached the door. Her fear had not vanished, but it no longer controlled her feet. She placed the dried sage on the floor without touching the handle. "You called my name," she said. Silence. Then the golden light returned beneath the door. "What do you remember?" Bryony asked. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the woman answered. "Your mother." Bryony's throat tightened. Torsten stepped closer, but she raised one hand, asking him silently to wait. What about her? The voice became clearer. She closed this door. Bryony looked at Torsten. His face had gone still. Why? She asked. A long silence followed. When the answer finally came, it changed the question Bryony had been asking since her wedding. To keep the king outside. Which king? Bryony asked, and Torsten's silence frightened her more than the voice behind the door. The golden light beneath the threshold trembled once, then faded until the corridor was lit only by the wall lamps. No answer came. Bryony waited, but the chamber had fallen silent. She turned toward Torsten. You knew. Not that. His response was immediate. Then tell me what you did know. Torsten looked at the forbidden door as though it belonged to a history he had spent years trying to understand. My father sealed this corridor when I was a boy. No servant was permitted here. No guard was allowed to ask why. After his death, I found references to the Eastern Chamber in private royal ledgers, but every useful page had been removed. Bryony's fingers closed around the Wolfman Crescent key. And you never opened it? I tried once. Her eyes lifted to his. What happened? The lock would not turn. Torsten nodded toward her hand. Not for any royal key. The meaning settled slowly. Her silver key opened every private passage except the chamber, yet its symbol belonged to the Wardens. Perhaps it had never been intended to open the door. Perhaps it represented authority over something more important than a lock. Your father knew my mother, Bryony said. Torsten did not soften the truth. I believe he did. Was he the king she kept outside? I do not know. Bryony studied him, searching for evasion. She found frustration instead. Torsten was not guarding an answer. He was standing inside the same question. Then we find out. By sunrise they were back in the archive. This time Bryony chose where to search. If official histories had been altered, she wanted records no royal historian would consider important enough to rewrite. Kitchen accounts. Stable inventories. Servants' wages. Deliveries. Torsten followed her reasoning without argument. 3 hours later, Bryony found the first break. A household ledger from 20 years earlier recorded monthly deliveries of dried sage to the Eastern Royal Wing. The payments had been authorized not by the king, but by someone identified only as Warden M. Her mother's name had been Mara. Bryony's hands began to shake. She lived here. Torsten leaned over the ledger but did not touch it. At least for a time. Bryony turned another page. The sage deliveries stopped abruptly 24 years earlier. On that same date, the Eastern Corridor was closed by royal command. A week later, a carriage expense appeared for transportation to Bryony's western province. 1 adult woman. 1 infant girl. No names. Bryony stared at the entry until the ink blurred. Me. Torsten said nothing. He did not need to. For years, Bryony had believed her mother had always been a village healer, poor but content, raising an ordinary Omega daughter far from royal affairs. Now every childhood silence carried another meaning. The locked chest her mother never opened. The crescent symbol stitched inside Bryony's blankets. The warning about voices calling from impossible places. Why did she never tell me? Her voice broke despite her effort to steady it. Torsten answered carefully. Perhaps telling you would have made you easier to find. Bryony closed her eyes. It was not comfort, exactly, but it changed the shape of the hurt. Her mother's silence might not have meant mistrust. It might have been protection. When Bryony opened her eyes, Torsten had moved away, giving her space rather than deciding what she needed. She noticed that too. There must be more records. There are. Torsten's expression darkened. But not here. He led her to a narrow staircase behind the archive and stopped before a steel-bound cabinet bearing the royal crest. My father kept personal correspondence separately. I inherited the key when he died. I never found a reason to search letters from the year I was a child. You have one now. Torsten unlocked the cabinet. Inside were dozens of sealed bundles. Bryony searched the dates until she found the year of her departure from the palace. One packet bore the Wolfman Crescent symbol. Her pulse stumbled. The seal had already been broken. Torsten unfolded the first letter. His face changed as he read. What does it say? Bryony asked. He handed it to her. The handwriting was unmistakable. Bryony had seen it on childhood recipes, little notes beside her breakfast, and the final birthday card her mother had written before she died. Mara. My king, the letter began, I have obeyed every oath except the one that would sacrifice my daughter. The chamber has called to Bryony since the night she was born. I will seal it before I leave, because what waits beyond that door must never be allowed to choose her future. Bryony read the final sentence twice. Then she noticed something Torsten had missed. At the bottom of the page, beneath her mother's signature, another hand had added 6 words. The warden misunderstood what the chamber protects. Bryony looked up. Your father wrote this? Torsten examined the handwriting, and all color seemed to leave his face. No, he turned the letter over. A second Wolfang crescent seal had been pressed into the back, but this one had been deliberately scratched through. Then who did? Bryony asked. Torsten stared at the ruined seal. Someone who had access to my father's private letters. A bell sounded somewhere above them. Once. Twice. Then rapidly. Torsten straightened. That is the archive alarm. Footsteps approached beyond the locked staircase. Bryony instinctively reached for the letter, but Torsten stopped her with one quiet sentence. Your choice. She understood. Hide the evidence and remain protected, or carry it openly and force whoever was watching them to react. Bryony folded her mother's letter and slipped it into her own pocket. I am done disappearing from other people's records. Something fierce and unmistakably proud entered Torsten's eyes. The footsteps stopped outside. A voice called through the door. Your Majesty, the Eastern Chamber has opened. Bryony and Torsten stared at each other. She still held the only key they knew was connected to the Warden's, and it had never left her hand. The Eastern Chamber stood open when Bryony returned, but no one in the corridor could explain who had opened it. For royal guards waited several feet from the doorway, their faces pale with confusion. The black iron handle had not been damaged. The lock remained intact. Even stranger, the door had opened inward only a few inches, revealing nothing beyond it except darkness. Torsten stopped beside Bryony. Did anyone enter? No, Your Majesty, the captain answered. We heard the lock turn by itself. Torsten looked at Bryony's closed hand. The silver key was warm again. Everyone leaves this corridor, Bryony said. The captain hesitated and looked to Torsten for confirmation. Bryony felt the old humiliation immediately. She wore a queen's ring now, but to the court she was still an Omega whose authority existed only when the Alpha King permitted it. Torsten noticed the hesitation too. You heard your queen. The guards bowed and withdrew. It was a small moment, but Bryony felt its weight. Torsten had not spoken for her. He had made certain her own command stood. When they were alone, she approached the opening. Torsten remained beside her rather than stepping ahead. Your mother told you never to follow the voice, he reminded her. She told me to ask what it remembered. Bryony removed Mara's letter from her pocket. And she wrote that she sealed the chamber because she would not let it choose my future. Which means entering may be exactly what she feared. Or exactly what someone wanted her to fear. Torsten glanced at the added sentence on the letter. The warden misunderstood what the chamber protects. Bryony took one more step. I am going inside. Every instinct in Torsten seemed to resist, but he did not command her to stop. Then I go with you. Bryony shook her head. The voice said my mother closed the door to keep the king outside. His expression tightened. You expect me to let you enter alone? No. I expect you to trust my decision while remaining close enough to help if I call. The silence between them carried more than disagreement. This was the first real test of the promise Torsten had made when he gave her an escape key. Protection could not mean ownership. Finally, he stepped back. I will be here. Bryony pushed the door. Golden light spread across the floor. There was no hidden prisoner, no creature, no mysterious woman waiting beyond it. The chamber was almost empty. Sage bundles hung dried and gray along the walls. At the center stood a circular stone table carved with the Wolfang crescent symbol. On it rested a wooden cradle. Bryony stopped. It was small enough for an infant, its pale wood darkened by age. A faded green ribbon remained tied around one corner. She knew that ribbon. Her mother had kept its matching half inside the locked chest at their cottage. Bryony approached slowly. Inside the cradle lay a folded cloth and a sealed envelope. Her name was written across it in Mara's hand. "Bryony," Torsten called softly from the corridor. "I am safe." Her voice trembled. She opened the envelope. "My little bird, if you are reading this, then the chamber called you back despite everything I did to keep you free." Bryony swallowed and continued. "Do not mistake inheritance for obligation. A warden protects the boundary between royal power and the ancient bond that gives it legitimacy. The chamber does not command the warden. The warden decides whether the king remains worthy of what he carries." Bryony lowered the letter. Suddenly, the forbidden room was no longer a prison containing something dangerous. It was a place from which someone had once judged kings. Her mother had not hidden Bryony because the chamber wanted to harm her. Mara had fled because someone had tried to turn her daughter's inherited choice into a duty. Bryony read the next lines. "I feared they would raise you to believe obedience was sacred. It is not. Your choice is. If a king ever asks you to surrender it, walk away from him." Behind her, Torsten remained outside exactly where she had asked him to stay. Bryony looked back. The Alpha King could have crossed the threshold. Nothing physical prevented him now. Yet he had chosen not to. Something inside her shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But the first foundation of it. Then she noticed the final line. "If the chamber opens before your 25th year, someone has awakened the royal bond without a warden's consent." Bryony's breath caught. She was 24. Torsten. He appeared at the threshold but did not enter. "What is it?" Bryony turned the letter toward him. Before he could read it, the stone table began to glow beneath her hands. The wolfan crescent carving illuminated first, followed by words hidden beneath years of dust. Bryony brushed the surface clean. 2 names emerged. One was hers. The other was Torsten's. Beneath them was a date. 6 months before their wedding. Torsten stared at it. "That is impossible." Bryony understood why. 6 months ago, they had never met. Yet someone had entered their names into the chamber long before Torsten received the record that led him to her. Their marriage had not begun when the Alpha King chose an obscure Omega 3 months ago. Someone had been arranging their paths before either of them knew the other existed. Bryony touched the carved date, and a hidden compartment opened beneath Torsten's name. Neither of them moved for several heartbeats. Inside lay a narrow strip of parchment secured with black wax. Torsten remained beyond the threshold, honoring the boundary she had chosen even as his eyes fixed on the seal. "That belonged to my father's private council," he said. Bryony lifted the parchment. "Then someone from his council was here 6 months ago." She broke the wax and unfolded it. The message contained only a sequence of dates, each paired with a royal ceremony. Coronations. Mate recognitions. Succession oaths. Beside every entry was the same notation, "Warden consent confirmed." The final entry was different. It carried Torsten's name, followed by a date 6 months earlier and 3 words that chilled her. "Consent not obtained." "The royal bond," Bryony whispered. "Someone activated it without a warden." Torsten's expression hardened. "And then ensured I found you." The pieces began fitting together with frightening precision. Someone had awakened an ancient royal mechanism. Someone had placed Bryony's name beside Torsten's before they met. Then her identity had surfaced in a provincial record, followed by a warning designed to make Torsten bring her into the palace while keeping her away from the one place capable of revealing the truth. "The warning was not protecting me from this room," Bryony said. "It was protecting whoever did this from me." Torsten stepped closer to the threshold but stopped there. "Which means our marriage may have completed something they started." Bryony looked down at her wedding ring. Until now, she had seen the marriage as Torsten's decision, however protective his intentions. Now she understood that his decision had itself been shaped by carefully planted information. Someone had manipulated a king by giving him just enough truth to make his choices predictable. Anger replaced her fear. Who knew you would marry me instead of simply placing me under guard? Someone who knows how I rule. Torsten's voice was quiet. I protect people by bringing threats within reach of my own authority. Then they used your strongest instinct against you. He accepted the judgment without defending himself. Yes, that mattered to Bryony. A weaker man might have blamed the mystery, the council, or even her. Torsten simply accepted responsibility for the choice he had made. She left the chamber carrying Mara's letter and the black-sealed parchment. The moment she crossed the threshold, the golden light vanished. The door remained open. Torsten looked at it, then at her. I gave you one rule because I believed that room was the danger. And now? Now I believe the rule served the person who wanted us ignorant. Bryony waited. Torsten reached for the black iron handle and then stopped before touching it. What happens to the door is your decision. The significance struck her harder than she expected. On their wedding day, he had defined their marriage with a prohibition. Now, less than 24 hours later, he was surrendering that prohibition because the truth had changed. Leave it open, she said. Torsten nodded. It stays open. Footsteps sounded at the far end of the corridor. An elderly man in dark council robes approached, accompanied by 2 royal clerks. He was tall and silver-haired, with the composed expression of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Torsten's posture changed immediately. Lord Berenger. The counselor bowed. Your Majesties. His eyes moved toward the open chamber, and for one fraction of a second, his composure failed. Bryony saw it. So did Torsten. I was informed there had been a disturbance, Berenger continued. The Eastern Chamber is forbidden under royal decree. For the Queen's safety, it should be sealed immediately. Bryony felt Torsten's attention shift toward her, but he said nothing. He was giving her the choice publicly now. No, Bryony said. Berenger blinked. Your Grace. The chamber remains open. His polite expression tightened. With respect, ancient matters of royal security are not generally understood by someone raised outside the court. The insult was elegant enough to hide beneath etiquette. Bryony did not lower her eyes. Then perhaps the court should explain why someone entered that chamber 6 months ago and placed my name beside the king's. Berenger became completely still. There. Bryony felt certainty settle inside her. Not proof of guilt, but proof that he knew the significance. Torsten stepped beside her. You recognize what she described. I recognize many old ceremonies, Your Majesty. That was not my question. Berenger recovered quickly. Then I suggest this matter be presented before the Royal Council. It will be, Bryony said. Tomorrow morning. Berenger looked at Torsten, evidently expecting correction. None came. Instead, Torsten spoke with calm finality. The Queen has called the council. You will attend. For the first time, Bryony watched a powerful man bow because she had spoken, not because Torsten had spoken afterward. Berenger withdrew, but his expression told her the hidden conflict had changed. Whoever had erased her family from history could no longer depend on her remaining invisible. After he disappeared, Torsten looked at Bryony. You forced his hand. I gave him a choice. He revealed what frightened him. A faint warmth entered Torsten's eyes. You would have made a dangerous courtier. I have no intention of becoming one. She looked toward the open chamber. I would rather become something they cannot erase. Then the silver key in her hand turned cold. From inside the chamber came the woman's voice once more, clearer than ever. Warden. Bryony turned. The false bond is waking. Torsten's face changed. A deep golden mark appeared briefly beneath the skin over his hand, shaped like the same broken crescent carved into the ruined seal. Bryony understood at once that the conspiracy had never been designed merely to bring them together. Their marriage had activated whatever someone had begun 6 months earlier. The golden mark on Torsten's hand brightened once, and every lamp in the corridor went dark. Bryony heard his breath catch, but he did not reach for her. Instead, he stepped away. Do not touch me. She understood immediately. Whatever had awakened inside him might be trying to force the very bond her mother had feared. Tell me what you feel. Torsten stared at the broken crescent glowing beneath his skin. A pull toward you. His jaw tightened. Not affection. Not choice. Something else. Bryony's fear sharpened into anger. Someone had attempted to manufacture destiny and disguise it as love. Can you resist it? Yes. Torsten took another deliberate step backward. The mark dimmed. Then keep resisting. The woman's voice came from the chamber. The warden must judge before the bond completes. Bryony turned toward the open doorway. Judge what? Golden light spread across the stone table, revealing words that had not appeared before. A royal bond without consent may command devotion, obedience, and succession. Only the warden may refuse it legitimacy. Bryony's stomach tightened. This was larger than her marriage. If such a bond could be imposed on a king, whoever controlled it could influence the crown itself. Torsten read the inscription from the threshold. That is why your mother ran. She was protecting more than me. She was protecting your right to choose. Bryony looked at him. And yours. For the first time, Torsten seemed shaken by that possibility. He had spent his life believing power meant protecting everyone beneath his crown. Yet someone had found an ancient mechanism capable of turning his own instincts into chains. Tomorrow's council cannot wait, Bryony said. Agreed. And Berenger cannot know everything we discovered. Torsten studied her. What do you propose? We give him something to believe. By morning, the royal council chamber was full. Lords, provincial alphas, royal clerks, and elder advisors stood beneath banners bearing Torsten's crest. Bryony entered beside him in her simple sage green gown. The whispers began immediately. She heard Omega. Village girl. Untrained queen. This time, none of the words made her smaller. Berenger stood near the council table, composed once more. Your Majesty, he began, I understand the Queen entered the Eastern Chamber despite your prohibition. Bryony felt the trap. He wanted the room to believe she had disobeyed Torsten and endangered the crown. Torsten could have destroyed the accusation with one command. Instead, he looked at Bryony. Her choice. She stepped forward. I entered after the chamber opened by itself. Murmurs spread through the council. Berenger frowned. Convenient. Very, Bryony agreed. Especially because whoever opened it apparently expected the king to blame me. His eyes narrowed. That is speculation. Then let us discuss evidence. She placed a copied page from the household ledger on the table, not Mara's letter and not the black-sealed parchment. Someone erased my mother from royal history. Someone also removed my family from provincial records. I want the council to authorize an investigation into every archive alteration made during the last 25 years. Several councillors exchanged uneasy looks. Berenger responded too quickly. That would expose protected royal records. Bryony had been waiting for precisely that objection. Then you agree records were protected. Silence. Berenger realized his mistake. Some records are naturally restricted. Including records concerning wardens? The room changed. Two elderly councillors looked toward Berenger before they could stop themselves. Bryony saw it. Torsten saw it. More importantly, everyone else saw it. So the wardens existed, Bryony said quietly. Berenger's composure cracked. This discussion is inappropriate. Torsten finally spoke. No. What is inappropriate is my queen discovering that members of my council know more about her inheritance than she does. His voice never rose, yet the room fell completely silent. He removed his glove. The broken crescent glowed faintly across his hand. Shock moved through the chamber. Someone activated an unlawful royal bond 6 months ago, Torsten said. Before I met Bryony. Before I chose to marry her. Berenger went pale. Your Majesty, you cannot know that. Bryony's heartbeat steadied. He had done it again. Not surprise. Recognition. But you can, she said. Every face turned toward him. Berenger looked at Torsten, then at Bryony, and understood that denial would no longer protect him. You think this was done to control the king, he said slowly. You are wrong. Bryony waited. Then tell us why. Berenger's gaze settled on her. Because the bond was never meant to control Torsten. His use of the king's name sent another ripple through the council. It was meant to find you. Bryony felt the room narrow around those words. Berenger continued before Torsten could interrupt. Your mother did not flee because someone wanted to force you into service. She fled because she discovered the Warden line had been corrupted generations ago. Corrupted how? Bryony asked. Berenger's expression carried something worse than triumph. Pity. The chamber does not merely judge whether a king is worthy. It transfers the ancient authority to whoever the Warden recognizes. Bryony remembered Mara's warning. Do not mistake inheritance for obligation. Why awaken the bond? Because without it, the chamber would never call you home. Torsten stepped forward. Who ordered it? Berenger looked toward the oldest man seated at the far end of the council table. Bryony followed his gaze. The elderly counselor slowly removed the royal signet from his finger. Beneath it was a scar shaped like a broken crescent. I did, he said. Because Torsten was never lawfully recognized as king. The oldest counselor's confession silenced the room so completely that Bryony could hear the faint hum of the golden mark on Torsten's hand. Your name, she said. The man rose slowly. Osric. Torsten's expression showed recognition without warmth. Keeper of succession records for 38 years. Osric inclined his head, long enough to know what your father concealed. Torsten remained beside Bryony rather than approaching him. Explain. Osric looked around the chamber. The crown does not pass through blood alone. In the oldest law, royal blood grants a claim. The Warden grants legitimacy. Uneasy murmurs spread among the counselors. Bryony understood why generations of kings might have wanted such a truth forgotten. My mother could have refused Torsten's father, she said. She nearly did, Osric replied. King Harold feared that possibility. He ordered the Warden records altered and reduced the chamber to a royal secret. Mara discovered what he had done. Bryony remembered the first message from behind the door. She closed this door to keep the king outside. The words finally carried their full meaning. Mara had not been hiding a monster. She had been preventing a king from reaching an authority he believed belonged to him. Why did she take me away? Because you were the next warden. Harold wanted you raised inside the palace, taught from childhood that loyalty to the crown was your sacred duty. Osric's gaze lowered. Mara refused. Bryony touched the letter inside her pocket. If a king ever asks you to surrender your choice, walk away from him. Her mother had sacrificed status, security, and history itself so her daughter would grow up free enough to say no. Torsten's voice hardened. And you erased them. Osric did not deny it. Mara asked me to make them disappear. Bryony stared at him. You helped her. At first. Something painful crossed his face. Years later, I came to believe she had made another mistake. Without a warden, the monarchy became vulnerable. When Harold died unexpectedly, there was no lawful recognition of his successor. Every eye moved to Torsten. So you decided I was not king, Torsten said. I decided the ancient law had never answered the question. And 6 months ago you awakened the false bond to drag Bryony back here. Osric nodded once. I believed the chamber would compel her to judge you. Bryony felt anger rise, clean and steady. You believed my mother was wrong to let me choose, so you took away my choice to correct her. Osric opened his mouth, then stopped. There was no defense that did not prove her point. Berenger knew, she asked. Berenger's face tightened. I knew Osric was searching for the warden. I did not know he had activated the bond until after it began. But you sent the warning, Bryony said. His silence confirmed it. Why? Because once I understood what he had done, I feared what would happen if you entered the chamber before we could stop the bond. Torsten looked at him. Then why not tell me the truth? Berenger gave a bitter, exhausted laugh. Because your father spent 20 years making the truth treason. That landed differently. The conspiracy Bryony had imagined was not one clean line of villains working toward the same goal. It was the inheritance of fear, secrecy, and people deciding for others because they believed their reasons were important enough. Her mother had tried to break that inheritance. Everyone after her had rebuilt it. The golden mark on Torsten's hand suddenly flared. Several counselors stepped back. Torsten's shoulders stiffened, and his eyes found Bryony with an intensity that frightened her. Leave, he said. Bryony did not move. Torsten. The bond is getting stronger. He forced himself another step away from her. I can feel it trying to make your presence necessary. Osric whispered, the recognition has begun. Stop it, Torsten ordered. Only the warden can. Everyone turned toward Bryony. There it was again. An entire kingdom waiting for her to perform the role others had chosen. She refused to let urgency become another chain. What happens if I recognize him? Osric answered carefully. His crown becomes legitimate under the ancient law. The bond stabilizes. And if I refuse? The ancient authority leaves his line. Torsten's crown, alliances, perhaps the entire succession could change. Yet Torsten did not ask her to save him. Instead, he removed the royal signet from his hand and placed it on the council table. No, Osric stared. Your Majesty? She will not make this decision while an artificial bond is pulling me toward her and an entire council is watching. Torsten looked at Bryony. The strain in his face was unmistakable, but his voice remained steady. Your mother gave up everything so you could choose freely. I will not become the man who makes her sacrifice meaningless. Something inside Bryony broke open then, not because destiny demanded it, but because Torsten was willing to lose his crown rather than demand her obedience. What are you doing? She whispered. Correcting my first mistake. His gaze held hers. I married you to protect you without asking whether protection was what you wanted. I gave you a forbidden door instead of the truth. My intentions do not erase that. The Alpha King turned toward the assembled council. Until Bryony makes an uncoerced judgment, no one will call this bond sacred, destined, or proof that she belongs to me. The words stripped the false romance from what had been done to them. Bryony felt the emotional debt between them change. Torsten was no longer merely resisting the conspiracy. He was taking responsibility for the part his own choices had played. The broken crescent on his hand began to fade. Osric stared at it. That should not be possible. Bryony understood before anyone else did. The bond weakens when he refuses to use it. A low sound echoed through the palace. Not an alarm. The eastern chamber. The silver key in Bryony's hand turned warm. Then the woman's voice carried impossibly through the council chamber. The king has answered. Bryony's heart pounded. Answered what? The voice replied, whether power matters more than choice. The great doors behind the council opened by themselves. Beyond them, far down the royal corridor, golden light poured from the eastern chamber. Now, the voice said, the warden must answer too. Bryony walked toward the eastern chamber while the entire royal council followed at a distance. Torsten did not walk beside her. He remained several steps behind, leaving a deliberate space between them that said more than any vow spoken at their wedding. This decision would be hers. Inside the chamber, golden light covered the circular stone table. The old cradle remained where Mara had left it, its faded green ribbon hanging motionless from one corner. Bryony approached the table and placed her silver key into the wolfan crescent carving. It fit perfectly, but there was no lock to turn. The metal simply settled into the stone as though returning to a place prepared for it years ago. Words appeared around the carving. Recognition cannot be inherited. Recognition cannot be commanded. Recognition must be freely given. Bryony looked toward Osric. You knew this. The old counselor lowered his head. I knew part of it. And you decided part of the truth gave you the right to control all of our lives. He had no answer. Bryony turned to Beringer. And you knew enough to warn Torsten, but chose secrecy because you feared the old laws. Beringer bowed his head too. Yes. Bryony understood then what her mother had been fighting. Not one cruel man. A system built from generations of people who believed fear justified taking choices away from others. Torsten's father had hidden the wardens to protect his crown. Mara had fled to protect her daughter. Osric had awakened the false bond to restore an ancient law. Beringer had hidden the truth to prevent chaos. Even Torsten had married Bryony believing he could protect her first and explain later. Different intentions. The same mistake. Bryony faced the council. No person will ever again be erased from history because their freedom is inconvenient to the crown. Her voice carried through the chamber. The Warden records will be restored. Every altered archive will be investigated. The authority of the Wardens will be made public, and no future recognition will be valid unless both King and Warden act without coercion. Osric looked up sharply. You cannot change laws older than this kingdom. Then perhaps they have been waiting too long to change. Torsten's voice came from behind her. By authority of the crown, I ratify the Warden's judgment. Her reforms will be entered into royal law, and this council will answer publicly for their enforcement. Bryony turned. Torsten had removed his sword and laid it beside his royal signet on the floor outside the chamber. He entered without either symbol of authority. The council stared. Bryony did too. You asked me once why I married you, he said. I told you it was to keep you safe. That was true, but incomplete. He stopped several feet away. I was afraid. Your name appeared in records someone was destroying. I believed if you became my wife, no one could reach you without facing me first. I never considered that I was also deciding your future before you understood the danger. Regret showed plainly in his face now, without excuses. I cannot undo that choice. I can only refuse to repeat it. Bryony felt tears gather, but she did not look away. If I refuse you now? Then you leave with your title, your property, your protection, and your freedom. The marriage will end if that is what you choose. Murmurs moved through the council. Torsten ignored them. And the crown? Bryony asked. If refusing me costs you the ancient legitimacy, then I will surrender it. You would give up the throne? Before I keep it by making you a prisoner. Then the voice of the chamber, the same ancient presence that had first called Bryony's name through the forbidden door, spoke for the final time. The false bond is broken. Bryony closed her eyes. Nothing pulled her toward Torsten. No ancient command. No manufactured destiny. Whatever she felt now belonged entirely to her. When she opened her eyes, she looked at the man rather than the king. She remembered him remaining outside the chamber because she had asked. She remembered him supporting her authority before the guards, letting her challenge his counsel, admitting his mistakes, and placing his crown beneath her freedom. I do not recognize you because a bond chose you, Bryony said. Torsten remained still. I recognize you because when power demanded my obedience, you chose my freedom instead. She placed her palm on the stone table. Torsten is worthy to remain king. Golden light swept through the chamber and outward into the corridor. The wolf and crescent symbol appeared briefly above the doorway before dissolving into warm light. Outside, the council bowed. But Bryony did not. Torsten looked at her and smiled for the first time since she had known him, not triumphantly, but with quiet relief. And our marriage, he asked. Bryony removed her wedding ring. The room went still. She placed it on the table between them. Torsten's face tightened, but he accepted her choice without protest. Then Bryony reached into her pocket and placed Mara's letter beside it. The marriage you arranged to protect me ends here. Torsten bowed his head. I understand. Bryony picked up the ring again. If there is another one, it begins differently. He looked up. How? You ask. Emotion moved across his face. The Alpha King who could command armies stood before one Omega woman and did the simplest thing no ancient bond had been able to do for him. Bryony, will you choose a life with me? She let the silence belong to her before answering. Yes. Months later, the Eastern Chamber no longer had a forbidden door. Its entrance remained open, and the restored Warden histories filled shelves that anyone in the kingdom could request to read. Osric was removed from authority for manipulating the royal bond, while Berenger remained only after publicly accounting for the records he had concealed and helping restore what had been erased. Bryony's mother's name was returned to the royal archive, Mara, Warden of the Crown, who chose her daughter's freedom over royal command. And beside Mara's name appeared Bryony's, not as property of an Alpha King, not as an Omega accidentally elevated by marriage, but as Warden in her own right. On the morning Torsten and Bryony exchanged new vows before the kingdom, he wore his black royal armor and crimson cloak, but he carried no expectation that fate entitled him to her. Bryony stood beside him in sage green, wearing the same silver wolf and crescent key at her neck. Once, Torsten had married her and given her one rule about a door she could never open. In the life they chose afterward, there was only one promise between them. Neither would ever close a door the other was not free to leave.